Those who are homeless to be exalted.
Good evening, everyone. I'm going to start, although some of the people on the list aren't here. Threats of traffic jams are sometimes enough to keep people back, and there may even actually be traffic jams. It's my pleasure to introduce this evening's event. I'm the president of the Belfast Charitable Society, and I have that honour. This is part of a series of talks we've been having this year, which is the 250th anniversary of the Charitable Society being incorporated by Act of Parliament and the construction of this wonderful building, which was completed in 1774. So some in-house housekeeping. First of all, there are no planned fire alarms. If a fire alarm goes off, if you would please wait to be guided out by the staff. Two of whom are here, others are outside. People guide you out, thank you. The bathrooms are to the right as you go out this door if you wish. And please turn off mobile devices so that we don't have any buzzing during the night. And as I say that, I just check my own device. Also a welcome to those who are online on the Zoom facility tonight. You're very welcome as well. Everyone will be muted online and throughout the talk. So please ensure that your camera is switched off. You can use the chat function, and at the end, your questions will be taken through me to our speaker, and we recommend that you use the speaker view. Now, a note for everyone, this evening's proceedings will be recorded. Now, as I've said, this is the 250th anniversary. This is the oldest working building in Belfast. It was paid for, completed, designed, in fact, if not actually built, by those enterprising merchants who got together to try and deal with the issue of poverty in the town, as it then was, in 1774. And this was originally built as a poorhouse and infirmary. And that's not a workhouse, because the workhouse system didn't come to Ireland until later. But it was a poorhouse, but nevertheless, one was required to work if one could at the time, because it had a dual purpose, really, under the legislation which established this society. One was to provide for those in need, that is, the poor by age or infirmity, and they were catered for here in the building. And at its peak, there were 450 residents in this building. Can you imagine where they all slept here, and how many of them slept in this room, and what facilities they had? Obviously, very limited at that time. But apart from the providing that facility, it also provided a facility of correction, in effect, because those who were regarded as sturdy beggars, that is, those who were fit but weren't working and could work, could also be detained here and put to work. And that was the manner of the times, of course, that there was the deserving and there were some who were regarded as undeserving. And maybe there are echoes of that today, but fortunately not quite as severely, because you're not compelled to come in here and be detained for work. Now, throughout 2024, we've been trying to promote the society. We've arranged talks and tours and lectures, and I hope you've been on some of them. And the staff provide a fascinating account of the history of this society. And our mission for this year is to try and to ask the question of everyone and at every meeting, what is it that the Charitable Society could do today for the disadvantaged? What should we be looking at? What direction should we be taking? Because, of course, there's still a lot of disadvantage. We're housed in one of the poorest wards in Northern Ireland, and there's a lot of need. And we are constantly seeking ways of addressing that. Now, we're also hoping for additional donations this year. Everyone, welcome. Thank you. Yes. And we're promoting a cost of living fund, which is available this year, and we're hoping to provide for those in need out of that, as we have done in the past. Particular focus was, going back to COVID, a lot of children found that with home learning, you needed online facilities. And of course, many poor families didn't have laptops. The Society acquired 250 laptops, which were reconditioned and provided to the schools so that the pupils who didn't have the homework facility could then make use of them. Also, the other issue that we're currently dealing with as well, and which is a major demand on resources, is school meals, which aren't provided for in holiday time, and various voluntary organisations seek to provide breakfast and lunches for pupils out of term time, which is an issue. Now, to tonight's event, and the subject matter is Thomas McCabe, and he lived in a house very nearby, and our speaker is going to tell you a little about the house and what it is now, where it was and what it is now, and who Thomas McCabe was. But I won't say anything about that, save to say that he was connected with this society. And of course, he was a neighbour, because we'll find he lived next door virtually. He was a neighbour of this society. He's an unknown man who had a remarkable contribution to make to events in Belfast at that time. And he's the topic of this evening's talk, and his connection with the issue of slavery. He sat on the committee of this society, and he opposed slavery. And he would not have been familiar with, I think, because the timing is wrong, but one slave who has published his memoirs, and they're available, as you see in the book downstairs, is Equiano. And Equiano came to Belfast in 1791 or thereabouts, so some years after the opening of this society. And he attended a meeting of the society, which would have taken place in this room. So he was here almost 250 years ago, talking about slavery at that time. And of course, slavery wasn't abolished until later, but escaped slaves were free. They got here. But they were obviously not free in the slaving states. Now, our speaker this evening is Gerry McNamee, and Gerry's a retired teacher. He taught classics and history, mostly at St Malachy's College next door, and he retired a few years ago, and he is the college archivist, and he's interested in the history and heritage of the college, and of Thomas McCabe, and of this society. And he's spoken here before, and he's a friend of the society, and I'm delighted to introduce him to give his talk this morning. Gerry.
Thanks very much, Tony. I wasn't sure if I'd be talking to 4 people or 40 people, so we're on the upper end of that, which is fantastic. So I want you to come with me on a stroll into the imagination. So, concerned there, sir. And we're up to Carlisle Circus. And from Carlisle Circus, walk into Yanton Road, and it's not too long before you come to the gates of St Malachy's College. And walk up the avenue about 100 metres or so, you come to the what we call the front quad. And on the right, you'll notice a huge red door, enormous door, and it's always closed. And behind the red door, on the floor of that building, which it's in fact the drama studio, there is a trap door. The trap door guards the entrance to McCabe's well. This is the original well of Thomas's farmyard, and the well served his house, Vicinage House, which was Thomas's home for over 30 years. So come back down to the gates with me, and we'll go across directly opposite the gates on the far side of the end of the road, and beyond that grim grey granite wall, there lies Thomas's grave. And it's a short, let's say, a stone's throw from there to this building, and we'll talk about Thomas's noble association with this building shortly. And maybe a 5 minutes walk in the direction of town to Thomas's place of work and to the church he attended on Sunday.
Sorry, Gerry. Sorry, Gerry. I'm interrupting you.
Yeah.
But my son, who is watching, says that the audio isn't great for online viewers when the speaker's not at the lectern, because this is the microphone here.
Oh, of course it is, yes. I forgot about that part.
He'll keep me right. He'll keep
I'll
me
behave
right
myself.
if you stray too far.
Okay. That's grand. So my point is really that if you look around you, Thomas McCabe's spirit just infuses this whole area. The inner city, North Belfast, is, let's say, redolent with the influence of Thomas McCabe. And yet you will look in vain for Thomas's monument. You look in vain for a square or a street or a building that is named after him. And I don't think that's right. So now that I've got my rant out of the way, I can go and tell you a little bit more about Thomas. So this is Vicinage House. Click along here. And it's a curious name, which you don't hear much these days. And it is connected with proximity and nearness, so it's near Belfast. But what you've got to bear in mind is that in the mid-18th century, we're talking about a mile outside Belfast. So it's surrounded by countryside. And after McCabe's death, the house and the farm we're talking is quite substantial, it's about 12 acres. It was leased in 1833 and then sold by his widow Isabella to the Catholic bishop, Dr. Denver. And it became effectively the first St. Malachy's College. Now, as often happens in these cases, the name stuck, and Vicinage became an alternative name for the college well into the 20th century, maybe past the First World War. And you can see it on letterheads and older documents. Vicinage is referred to. Mind you, if you asked us as a Malachy student today about being at Vicinage, you'd get a very bewildered look. But in the lower part of the Antrim Road, on the countryside, let's say, of St. Malachy's College, those little streets do keep the name. You've got Vicinage Square and Vicinage Park. So it's the tower of the college that marks the location of Thomas's house. So we know this from a letter written by Monsignor James O'Laverty. O'Laverty was dean of the college and indeed a former chaplain to the poorhouse. He wrote this letter to a friend in 1860. And in the late 18th century, this house, we can see, was very much on its own. Maps of the time show it surrounded by fields and trees. And the next farmhouse to it, about half a mile up the track, or the lane, which eventually became the Antrim Road, it was so isolated, it was called Solitude. And many of you will know that's the name that survives in the name of the football ground belonging to Cliftonville, the oldest soccer club in Ireland. So this is the story of Thomas McCabe, and he's not exactly a household name. And yet I hope maybe within 20 minutes or so that you'll agree with me that he needs to be better known. Now, I'll be taking a very broad brush approach. There's no great detailed analysis of the sources. And I say a little bit about the members of his family, other members of his family, Thomas's circle of friends, and a little bit about Belfast of that time. And I can provide the details of where I got my information if anybody wants them at the end. So just come back to the, very little change. That's the college round about 1912. So the tower and the Dorian building, as we call it, is very much there. I'm thinking back there to when I was given off about Thomas not having a monument, and I should exonerate those wonderful people in the Ulster History Circle who in 1998 put a blue plaque up to Thomas McCabe, and it's just right beside the red door. Okay, we're lucky enough in this period of Irish history and indeed Belfast history to have quite a lot of detail. There are great records from contemporary writers. I'm thinking, for example, of the Drennan letters, all 1,400 of them. A little bit hard to navigate your way around them, but it's almost a daily account of the thoughts and aspirations of the leading Belfast radicals during this 1790s. So these Drennan letters are named after the physician and writer William Drennan, who lived variously in Belfast, Newry, and Dublin. He was an obstetrician, and he was in fact attached to the society here, the Charitable Society, at one time. And later on, he's associated with the foundation of RBAI, known to us in Belfast, of course, as INST. So William Drennan corresponded with his sister, Martha McClear, and her husband, Samuel. He seems to have treated, as in medically treated, his friend Thomas McCabe at one stage, and he also purchased his watch from him. What else is there in terms of records? Well, there's the lengthy and often tedious, but occasionally entertaining autobiography of Wolfe Tone. There's the very useful George Ben's History of Belfast, and Madden's biographies of the United Irishmen, also useful. Madden himself was an abolitionist. But more than these, I'm grateful to a man called John McCabe, the late John McCabe. John died about 5 years ago, and he wasn't one of these McCabes. He was a Fermanagh McCabe. And John left me a whole box of materials. He came to talk at the college once or twice, and he was very much a superb investigator. So I do miss John, and it's good that he's remembered. I think he'd like to have been one of these McCabes. I'd like to have found out some connection, but he never did. So I've resisted the temptation to put up a family tree. I find them a wee bit scary. Maybe that's my own family tree, mind you. But bear in mind, we're talking about four brothers. And we'll dismiss the first two quite quickly. So our story begins not in Belfast, but in Lurgan, where in the early part of the 18th century, there lived a man called Patrick McCabe. And Patrick, I'm going to just click on here to, Patrick, we know very little about. Born in 1708, and practically the only thing that we know is that he constructed the clock on the steeple of Shankill Church of Ireland in Lurgan in the year 1744. This church dominates the main street of Lurgan. Apparently, it's the biggest
Church of Ireland church that isn't a cathedral. And I doubt very much if this structure here dates from 1860. I doubt very much if that is Patrick McCabe's clock, the original clock. So Patrick married a lady called Mary Maziere, and the couple had 4 sons, John, James, William, and Thomas. And they all followed their father into the clockmaking and watchmaking trade. Now, the sons, after learning the trade, they moved in quite different directions. John moved to Newry, set up his jewellery shop in Newry, maybe for a year, then off to Dublin, did the same in Dublin, again, maybe for a year, before he headed off to Baltimore in the USA. Now, it's always great when you get a connection, but I got an email from a lady last year called Myrta Rama, and Myrta was from Iowa, and she said, the 5 times great-grandchild of John McCabe. So that was, Myrta was maybe about 15 emails later, she hopped on a plane to Dublin, and she had a good old walk around Dublin and Belfast and did a bit of research, which is here, which I think is maybe, James, I think you've got a photograph of her up at the grave. That's always nice to have that connection. So in terms of clockmaking now, and the whole business of watches, the most successful son by far was James. James also worked in Lurgan for a few years with his father, but travelled to London in 1775. And there he established the illustrious House of McCabe, firm of watch and clockmakers in Fleet Street. And the company's fine watches were really known and respected throughout the world. And the firm, James died in 1811, but James McCabe watchmaking dynasty kept going through his son, also James, then another James, and then Robert. And Robert carried on the business to the end of the 19th century, well, starting into the 1880s. Now, thanks to Professor Google, I can tell you that this firm produced 50,000 watches and 7,000 clocks. Who knows? But there's a couple of examples of just how prestigious these timepieces were. When Admiral Horatio Nelson, when his gold pocket watch, which had passed into the possession of his mistress, Lady Hamilton, when it came up for auction in Sotheby's in 2005, it sold for £450,000. So it was, sure enough, a James McCabe timepiece, bearing the inscription, presented to Admiral Lord Nelson by the officers of HMS Victory, August the 20th, 1805. We know also that there's good evidence that George Washington, first president of the United States, also purchased a McCabe watch with a gold case in Philadelphia from a jeweler called Ephraim Clark. Now, apparently George Washington loved pocket watches, and he had several, and he was also a stickler for punctuality. So these early McCabe watches are very collectible, and if you own or come across a McCabe watch, take good care of it, as it could be worth a tidy sum. I think there's still a firm called McCabe, not entirely sure, I meant to check that, a firm that trades under that name. Anyway, the clock is ticking, as they say, so let's move on. We now have 2 remaining McCabe brothers. William and Thomas made their way to the thriving little town of Belfast. William didn't stay long, and after a brief period in Lisburn, he settled in Newry, where he set up a jewellery business, and where we know that he was a respected member of the local volunteers. And he died there on the 12th of June, 1785, and William Drennan has a record of his attendance at the funeral. So that leaves us with Thomas. Thomas set up his watch and jewellery making business in Belfast in 1762. It was in the shop was in Donegal Street, very close to the junction that's known as the Four Corners. That's not telling you much about the Four Corners. I'm going to use the device that James gave me there just to see when I just put my, let's just see. Doesn't seem to come up on the screen, but I think we're talking. It's letting me down there. What I wanted that map to show, in fact, I got back to the desk, otherwise I've been in trouble. I wanted that map to show, in fact, you can see, make out McCabe's house vicinage, just about the end of Shankill, is that right? Yeah. That's the one, yeah. So that's the Williamson map from 1791. There's a nice production of it up in the college. I think there's one here as well. Oh, right.
I touched it, or maybe you touched it.
Right,
And then
okay.
it is focused in.
Oh, very good,
Oh,
yeah.
right. Well, there we are.
You're well in charge of the technology there. Yeah, fantastic. Now we've figured that one out. Yeah. So 1762, and this junction, the Four Corners, it's the confluence of Donegal Street, Waring Street, Rosemary Lane, and what's missing? North Street. So some Belfast comedian a little bit later on called Donegal Street the road to ruin, because it began with a bank and ended with the poorhouse. Anyway, later on, Thomas would transfer his business round the corner from Donegal Street to number 6, North Street. So this square, this junction, was the hub of the little town, the focus of commercial and social life. And Thomas, round the corner from his business, he had his family box pew in First Presbyterian, Rosemary Street, short walk. And from the start, it was clear that Thomas was a very astute businessman. He had great confidence in his products, as we can deduce from this advert. Now, I'm going to pop up the actual paper, but it's got very fuzzy, so this will. So Thomas McCabe, as you see, literally settled near the Four Courts, not the Four Corners in Belfast, proposes that gentlemen who please to deal with him may have a trial for a year before payment of any kind of watch at the price of 8 guineas and upwards. You'd be lucky to get a deal like that in town now. What kind of town had Thomas come to in the 1760s? Well, clearly Belfast was a small market town. We're talking maybe the size of Ballyhinch, Ballyclare, but it was a small market town that was on the cusp of a massive expansion and a rapid expansion. 5 years before that advert appeared, the population was just 8,500. And then in 1791, not even 3 decades after the advert, it was 18,500. I rounded those a wee bit, those figures, but we know from contemporary accounts, and you can find quite a few detailed examples in George Bain's history. History of Belfast, 1877, he wrote that the streets in the 1760s were narrow and dark. The houses were in poor condition. Some, indeed, were still thatched. There was no amenities like hospitals, and as yet no poorhouse. The River Farset was not covered over until 1770 and was still the main sewer. So we're not going into any detail on that. Towards the end then of the 1780s, we have a complete and rapid transformation. By 1790, new and fashionable houses have appeared. There are improvements in the harbour. Now, among the structures are here, Belfast Charitable Institute, 1774, Have I got that right? 1774?
Yes.
The White Linen Hall in 1785, which was to become the site of the City Hall later. The Society for Promoting Knowledge, which we know as the Linen Hall Library in 1792, and Belfast Fever Hospital in 1797. All of these are constructed during this brief period. So there's no shortage of admiring visitors. Here's one of them. I want to introduce you to this man. This is one Charles Coslett. He's a Dublin-based American whose little handwritten travel diaries were discovered in the archives of St. Malachy's College, and these have yet to be published. It's a strange portrait. You kind of look at that and think this guy could be 20 or he could be 60. You know, but in one of these diaries now, he records a tour around Ireland, which includes a visit to Belfast. Now, so on the 20th of July, 1793, he takes a stroll around Belfast. I'm not sure if he caught Belfast on a good day, but he's mightily impressed with the houses, the churches, streets, squares, public buildings, and claiming that they rank second to those in Dublin. Now, there's a lot of soldiers about, and Coslett is a little nervous, and he doesn't stay long. He's heard about a very tasty inn up in Hillsborough, and he heads up there on the next day for his lunch. I feel that Coslett is a bit like, he's like an 18th century version of Michael Portillo. You know, the guy with the Bradshaws who does the scooting around the railways of Europe. Do you know that business of giving patrician approval to the architecture before maybe talking to some locals, and then he quickly hops on his way to his next destination without really getting a true flavour of the place. But we can talk more about Coslett later if need be. I do hope now that we can publish his diaries, 2 of them in St. Malachy's College, 6 of them in the William L. Clements Library in the University of Michigan. So we need to investigate what happened there. But they know about our diaries, we know about theirs. So we're going to get a publication, hopefully, in the new year. So this is further evidence of progress, and Belfast then is really on the move. The expansion had a great deal to do with the establishment of the cotton industry, the first of its kind in Ireland. And this was largely the achievement of 2 men, Robert Joy and the aforementioned Thomas McCabe. And yes, it is true that Belfast very soon will be known for linen and for shipbuilding, rope works, glass making, etc. But before all of that, there was cotton. So from your site, the picture of Charitable Institute, we've seen short walk from Vicinage. And Thomas was an active member of the Belfast Charitable Society. Through the early minute books, there's clear evidence of his assiduous attendance and concern for the poor. John Wesley had a look at it in 1778 and was very impressed, saying that he hadn't seen anything comparable anywhere in England. And now the story of this remarkable phenomenon that's Belfast Charitable Society has been well told. How, as a voluntary association, it took upon itself the regulation of so many aspects of Belfast life, looking after the poor and the sick, burying the dead, managing the water supply. And we know this from recent work, well, Robert Strain's work in the 1960s to Jonathan Barden a little later on, and of course the recent detailed examination of the legislative background by none other than Sir Ronnie himself. So I'm not going to trespass on any of that. I'll focus just on the cotton. So 1778, at considerable expense to themselves, McCabe and Joy furnished a section of the Belfast Charitable Institute. So in fact, it was the northeast wing of the cellar. David, we've been down there at all? Was there?
James is our man for this.
Yeah. So we'll send James down the cellar to check all that. So this is where the factory, the nascent factory, was begun. Remember that Thomas was very interested in machinery as a clockmaker. He knew about springs and catches and hinges and machinery in general. So this section of the building was fitted out with up-to-date machinery. The primary aim of these benefactors was to provide employment for the poor children, and they were well paid. It was a happy combination, if you like, of Presbyterian philanthropy and good business sense. Help came from an Englishman, Nicholas Grimshaw, who helped provide some of the machinery. A partnership was formed. First of all, McCabe and Joy, then McCabe, Joy and McCracken. That's John McCracken, father of Henry, Joy and Mary Ann. And the business prospered. So even though it was a small beginning, something quite extraordinary happened here in that year of 1778. These children, and we know there were 23 of them, were the first workers in Ireland's Industrial Revolution. And then things began to snowball. According to a notice in the Belfast newsletter of the 17th of March, 1784, arrangements were soon made to transfer to new premises, a warehouse at Rosemary Lane. So we can easily measure their success because the next year, 1785, they petitioned Parliament in Dublin for finance to aid further expansion, stating that they now employed 500 people. By the end of the century, a total of 13,000 were directly employed in the cotton industry in 11 factories in the greater Belfast area. So during these years, McCabe became involved in other ventures. He also put up the finance to support John Smiley's glassmaking factory, which was established at the end of the long bridge in Ballymacarrot. Maybe need to hop forward on that one. Yeah. There was really only the west of the Lagan, not much on the east side until after this period. This glassmaking factory was one of the biggest of its kind in the British Isles. And later in life, Thomas became passionate about education, and he was appointed the first trustee of the Joseph Lancaster School, the Quaker School in Frederick Street, just across the junction from us. So, landowner, businessman, jeweler, philanthropist, educationalist, watchmaker. Clearly, Thomas was a man of many parts, but he was also something more. He was also a member, in fact, a founding member of a secret society. And that, of course, was the Society of the United Irishmen, founded in Belfast in 1791. There was, as you know, a great deal of sympathy among the Presbyterians in Belfast with the ideals of the French Revolution. In fact, in no other city in the British Isles was the French Revolution celebrated as joyously as here in Belfast. Why Belfast and not Dublin or Cork? Well, the short answer is Presbyterianism, with its democratic structure and that influence from the Scottish Enlightenment. And of course, just like the Catholics, political exclusion. But Thomas McCabe was in the thick of the radical politics of the time. This is National Book Week, isn't it? Yeah. And I looked up what Thomas was reading, and according to Drellin's letters, he was reading William Godwin and Thomas Paine. He was absolutely steeped in the ideals of the French Revolution. It has been said that much of the activity which culminated in the 1798 rebellion was actually planned in Vicinage House. And this is highly likely. We know that leading radicals like Thomas Russell, famous as the man from God knows where, I think it was Cork actually he was from, and Theobald Wolfe Tone, and even some suspicious French visitors were entertained at Vicinage House. Tone's diary, for example, talks about strolling out to McCabe's place on the afternoon of October the 17th, 1791. So what was McCabe's part? It seems that McCabe was a treasurer or a finance officer of some sort. Now, I'm not going to go into the story of the 1798 rebellion. You probably know it well. It's pretty much one of failure. And the other reason, of course, that McCabe, as far as we know, played no active part in the fighting. He did suffer at the hands of the authorities. In March of 1793, his business in North Street was raided by the military. And due to the frequency of raids on his home and business, he hung a satirical sign outside his shop. And the sign read, Thomas McCabe, an Irish slave, licensed to sell gold and silver. And when the sign was attacked by the army, he simply had it repainted in defiance of their attempts to intimidate him and his family. Wolfe Tone always referred to him as McCabe, but quite often as the Irish slave. Tone was very given to nicknames. He gave nearly everyone a nickname. I don't think just so much to hide their identities as to keep himself amused. But as we've said, Thomas, as far as we can judge, played no active part in the fighting. By the way, he's not in this, this picture of the men of 1798. And yet, from Tone's diaries, he was very much at the core of the core committee of the radicals. So, no active part, but the same cannot be said for his son, William Putnam McCabe. William McCabe was born in Vicinage House in 1776. It's not known when he joined the Society of the United Irishmen, but he soon became what one official in London, Sir Charles Flint, described as the life and soul of the 1798 rebellion. He was a key figure in the planning of the uprising, and though he worked in his father's cotton business, he used his status as a travelling salesman as a cover. A talented organiser and master of disguise and accents, he travelled the length and breadth of Ireland, sometimes under assumed names, to drum up support for the cause. His career would make a good movie script. Countless narrow escapes. He led a charmed existence, jumping out of windows and hiding under beds and always keeping a step ahead of the enemy. He was a wanted man with £500 on his head. That's serious money in the 18th century. And when he was eventually arrested and jailed in 1798, he somehow managed to talk his way out of it. Apparently, he had this convincing alter ego as a Scottish beggar, complete with accent, and had never failed to work. In later life, he spent much time in Scotland and then set up a cotton mill in Rouen in Normandy. So eventually pardoned by the British government. He actually shouldn't have been pardoned because there's good evidence that he played a large part in directing Robert Emmet's rebellion in 1803. He was arrested in 1814 for at least a third time after entering Ireland illegally. But Robert Peel granted him a retrospective pardon on condition that he would stay away. He died in Paris in 1821, and is buried there. Now, if you want to read more of his escapades, that'll be in R.R. Madden's Lives of the United Irishmen. R.R., I think that's Richard Robert Madden. As for the Putnam part of his name, it seems he was given that in acknowledgement of the American rebel general Israel Putnam. Israel Putnam is famous for when his men were short of ammunition, in that expression, don't shoot till you see the whites of their eyes. And some people claim, I've seen it claimed that the McCabes were related, as the name Putnam carries on to the next generation, but I couldn't find any support for that. Incidentally, Israel Putnam is a character in one of those awful violent video games. Maybe it's defunct now, but so a very different stump, McCabe Jr. But why did McCabe Sr. back off from involvement in the insurrection? It could have been because he was too old. He was, what, 59, 60 at the time? That's not old. It's tempting to think that he became disillusioned with the extreme position of some of his colleagues and their activities, and maybe the prospect of violence did not appeal to him. Well, there is some evidence that he was a moderating force. In November of 1793, there was an altercation on a Belfast street when a group of drunken militia officers encountered McCabe and Thomas Russell on their way home from a meeting of the United Irishmen Secret Committee. Now, Russell probably had a few pints, and he was a bit of a hothead. And one soldier claimed that Russell had given him an insolent look and demanded to know the reason why, and offered to fight Russell. Kind of encounter you might get any Saturday night in Belfast. Who are you looking at? But not only did McCabe calm things down, but he insisted that Russell write out an apology to the young soldier. And this was to be delivered the next morning. Before it could be delivered, the officers came and delivered their own apology. So, bit of a damp squib there. That fellow Russell, Thomas Russell, he sat out the rebellion in jail. And later, of course, he would lose his life on the scaffold for his part in Robert Emmet's rebellion in 1803. But it's likely, I think, that Thomas McCabe backed away from involvement because of his financial problems during the mid-1790s. This seems to have been because of a large amount of money he had expended on the development of a new double loom for the cotton industry, and this was in cooperation with William Pierce of Manchester. The project appears to have been sabotaged by industrial espionage, and plans for the new loom and the prototype ended up in America. There's a letter in the Washington papers, a letter from Thomas McCabe to George Washington, dated Belfast, 21st of July, 1790, telling him about the new invention. Now, the damage was said to have been done by one Thomas Atwood Digges, a well-connected American, and unlike the other United Irish leaders, a Catholic who was living in Belfast and was, on occasion, a visitor to the vicinage. So this is worth a quick diversion. Digges had money troubles of his own. He was imprisoned for debt in 4 courts in Dublin in 1785. And during the next few years, he engaged in illegal smuggling of machinery to the United States. But by late 1789 or early 1790, he had moved to Belfast. And during the early 1790s, Digges befriended Tone and Russell. And although he encouraged Tone to seek Irish independence, the nature of his connection with the United Irishmen remains mysterious, and he may have been a double agent. Digges's motives and his character continued to be questioned. So he's actually a subject of a letter written by John Carroll, the Catholic Bishop of Baltimore, who felt obliged to warn James Troy, the Catholic Archbishop of Dublin, about Diggins. Now, it's a lengthy letter, and it more or less saying that he's up to no good, and he's a nasty piece of work. It finishes off that in his early youth he was guilty of such demeanours which would indicate deep-rooted depravity. To say that history has not been kind to Thomas Edward Diggins would be a gross understatement. Nobody seems to have a good word to say about him. Well, I hope nobody's related here. The most spectacular judgment being that of Benjamin Franklin, who claimed that there was a special place in hell for this rogue. His sin, it seems he embezzled funds collected for wounded soldiers. So, as a result of his financial difficulties, Thomas McCabe returned to Lurgan for at least a year, but he did manage to clear his debts. There's a piece of evidence that he had a consultation with his doctor, Drennan, and that he paid for it with silver plate. His last years, as far as we can judge, were spent peacefully at his home in Vicinage House. But it's not the radical politics or the business acumen or the entrepreneurial spirit of Thomas McCabe, which, in my view, should be his chief claim to fame, but rather his humanity. There's his work here with the society, but perhaps the best illustration of this humanity is that, in short, he's widely recognised as a man who saved Belfast from involvement in the slave trade. And this is how it happened. During the 1780s, when merchants in Bristol and Liverpool and London were growing fabulously wealthy from this despicable trade, a scheme was launched in Belfast in 1786. Now, Waddell Cunningham, banker and ship owner, said to be the richest man in Belfast, he was the chief instigator. He was the man with the plan. And I say banker, I think Cunningham's bank was the site of what became Bank Buildings, which is all kind of fixed up now after the fire. So Waddell Cunningham, certainly he was on the board here. He was a big figure in Belfast. This might be a little bit unfair, and it's certainly very unscholarly, but I'm tempted to think of him as an 18th century Donald Trump. Outrageously rich businessman, highly prejudiced, and with political ambitions beyond his capabilities. In any case, he induced several Belfast merchants to subscribe to a plan to fit out a vessel from our port to the coast of Africa. The ship would be able to convey between 500 and 600 slaves, and each trip would yield a profit of £20,000. It was Thomas McCabe who thwarted the scheme, according to one account, storming into the initial meeting to announce, "May God damn to hell the soul of a man who subscribes the first guinea." It's more likely that he wrote this in a proposal book, as this is mentioned in one of William Drennan's letters. According to the research of Nini Rogers, Nini has spoken here, she's looked at in some detail at the abolitionist movement in Belfast. McCabe became the spearhead of an energetic campaign. And as we've seen, his radical friends like Russell and Tone called him the Irish slave. That could be for different reasons, because he refused to get a license for selling gold, and in part of that protest, he gave himself that title on the notice. So we're not entirely sure about that, but that was as we've seen, Tone's nickname for him also. What is most interesting, however, about McCabe's intervention is the timing. Remember that this incident happened in 1786. This is Kerry's illustration, R.W. Kerry. You have McCabe with his back to us, supposedly, and confronting Waddell Cunningham, who's in his volunteer's uniform. And not entirely sure what these figures to the right of McCabe are supposed to be. But remember, this is like, I don't know, 1890, this illustration. So it's probably embellishing the story somewhat. But as I said, 1786, and that's barely a decade since those famous words were penned in the United States Declaration of Independence. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men were created equal. By my reckoning, William Wilberforce, the great English campaigner and abolitionist, had not yet started his campaign. His first speech to the House of Commons was on the 12th of May, 1789, and his bill would not be brought before Parliament for another 2 years. Now, Belfast Anti-Slavery Society was not officially formed until 1830, but it does seem that McCabe and some others were ahead of the curve on this. So here we have an Ulsterman, a citizen of Belfast, showing leadership and civic responsibility, a principled Presbyterian, taking a stand against an evil that's plagued humanity for centuries, an evil that neither popes or presidents or princes have managed to eradicate. And as citizens of Belfast, we should be making more noise about him. As the American academics would say, what is the takeaway from all of this? Historians, even amateur historians, need to be careful not to make exaggerated claims or false comparisons. There's no need to turn McCabe into a saint. But those of us who want, I think this is most of us, who want this great port city to be diverse, multicultural, vibrant, we need to tap into his sense of civic virtue. If McCabe's legacy can be turned into something more tangible, it would surely promote a more tolerant city, where other people's cultures and faiths are routinely accepted and celebrated, where there's no them and us, just us. No doubt he had his faults like the rest of us, and his revolutionary zeal will not appeal to some of our people. But what do we see in his career? We see concern for children, we see economic energy, and active citizenship. I get the impression that he was a humble man. Now, what evidence is there? Well, his house, as we've seen, was certainly of a decent size, but could not be described as ostentatious. Unlike some of his contemporaries, there are no statues or busts or portraits of him. And that's something refreshing, I think, looking back from this age of selfies and Instagram. His gravestone is a simple slab at ground level. And it's surrounded, it's among rows of some very elaborate family monuments, mausoleums. And by contrast, his adversary, Waddell Cunningham, he reposes in a huge mausoleum up there in Knockbreda churchyard. You couldn't miss it, opposite Beaver Golf Club, size of a house, really. And he's up there with other Belfast luminaries like the Lanyons and the Nielsen's. So according to the records here, James tells me that it was the 22nd of January 1819 that Thomas purchased his plot for his grave. And within a few months he was laid there. He died at home on the 5th of March 1820 in his 80th year. and he lies under that simple slab in Clifton Street graveyard on the far side of the granite wall and directly opposite his beloved vicinage and the gates of St Malachy's College. That's all I have. Thanks for listening. Attentive audience.
Very attentive, and thank you so much, Gerry. That was an enthralling talk about a character, as you say, underknown, but should be better known. And you were very insightful and thoughtful, humorous, and detailed about his life. Just one comment, if I may add, and that is, you saw the four corners there, and you saw the building on the right, which is contemporary of this building. It's the market house with the assembly rooms above, and what a condition it's in. It's dreadful. And it's been like that for years now, and it really requires attention from the public authorities. I'm not entirely sure who the owners are at the moment, but I think it's privately owned, and there have been schemes galore as to what to do with it. And really, it deserves better attention, and it deserves that it be done fairly quickly, because obviously these buildings begin to deteriorate there. And the painting that we saw, the Gerry painting, may well be taken to represent the assembly room above the market house. And also it's in that assembly room that the trial, or the military court-martial as it was, of Henry Joy McCracken took place. So it deserves historic interest as well. But, and being a contemporary of this, deserves preservation if possible. So I'm not sure who the authority is who should see to that, but somebody should.
We'll have a whip round.
A whip round, yes. I'm going to ask for a whip round in a moment. But I wasn't thinking of it for that. But first of all, I want to ask whether anyone would like to ask Gerry a question about anything. Are there any questions in the room from anyone about his talk? There's a comment there. Is there? Yeah. Okay. Well, Gerry.
Nothing.
Nothing arising.
Yeah.
So yes.
You guys ask. So he's a United Irishman in 1791 when the organisation was being formed, and sort of by 1793, then obviously United Irish movements began to move towards its underground phase. Is there anything to suggest that he continues with the organisation beyond that? Doesn't take part in 1798 itself.
No. As I say, I think it was exactly during the 1790s that things began to go a bit downhill for him financially. And there's some indication that when he had to go back to Lurgan, it's there is a letter which does talk about the disappearance of 6 cannon, and that McCabe might be during his more active phase that he was involved in that the cannon disappeared, and a couple of years later maybe they were found hidden in various parts around Belfast. But I don't think there's any evidence that McCabe fired a shot in anger, really. And as I say, I think probably towards the end of the 1790s, he was maybe concentrating on getting out of debt, really, rather than anything further. No, there's nothing really that would suggest he managed to stay out of jail and kept his life intact, I suppose, until 1820. So that might indicate also that he didn't really fire any shots, as it were. But no, it's quite a lot. You're looking at educated guesswork, really, to this. He does appear quite a lot in Tone's work, and at most of the key meetings he does get a mention, but then there were quite a lot involved. It's interesting that on that painting of the United Irishmen, McCabe, he's not there. He's not. You were showing me there, so only the names. So he's not there. So he wanted a low profile by a look at things, and then of course, no statue, no painting, no bust. So he did want to stay out of the limelight, and that presents problems for if we ever wanted to put a monument to him. Interestingly, I talked to the nephew of a resident. I'm not sure now. I've mixed up. Pat, you might have told me this, but I'm not entirely sure. But I talked to the nephew of a resident of Clifton House, who's now passed on, who claimed to have seen a portrait of McCabe, where in the Kremlin.
The Kremlin.
In the Kremlin. So
Well, that sounds a bit unlikely.
maybe send Pat over there to check out. I don't think I'll get down that rabbit hole anytime soon. But who knows? No, nothing that we can point to as a likeness of McCabe. And anything further? Anybody? Pat?
Yes.
We know why it's why they sold it on. We know why it's in it. It's rather particular reason.
Yeah, it could be money. This was Isabella, and it's McCabe's second wife. So when the bishop at that time, Crawley, leased the vicinage, and somewhere round about £60 a year, as I recall. So it was leased from Isabella, McCabe, and Jane Maria Coleman was McCabe's daughter. So it wasn't until 1837 that Cornelius Denver, the next bishop, was able to actually buy the ground and the house for £1,250. Mind you, he was getting 12 acres for that too, so I think he got a bit of a bargain. And the interesting thing, Pat, just when you mentioned the vicinage house sale, in the early days of the college, the students used the vicinage house as a boarding centre. So they didn't actually get their lessons there. They walked down to the building, the school beside St. Patrick's Church every morning. And this is maybe for the first 25, 30 years. And so the vicinage house was simply a boarding facility. Now, that's commemorated every St. Malachy's Day when the boys walk down to Mass in St. Patrick's, which in fact is tomorrow. I think St. Malachy's College kind of keeps their own liturgical calendar because St. Malachy's Day, I think, is the 3rd of November, but classes with all Souls Day. So for our purposes, Malachy's College purposes, it's the last day of the half term in the first term. So the boys will be heading down there maybe 11 o'clock. So avoid Clifton Street. It gets quite thronged. And then of course they get a half day after that, which is the start of their midterm break. Yeah.
Well, thank you again, Gerry, and if we can show our appreciation.